Okay, we are recording.
Great. After our usual struggles with things technical, we have Coral Outwater online, and she's going to tell us this morning about her work to enhance MPCA's outreach efforts to reduce chloride pollution from road salt and water softening sources, including overhauling the salt savings calculator, improving certification training presentations, integrating new scientific research, and collecting success stories. Coral is a recent graduate from Carleton College with a major in chemistry and minors in biochemistry and Japanese. Very interesting. She also says of herself that she plays the cello, she crochets, and loves to cook. Coral, it is great to have you with us. And having struggled through those initial um, problems to get you in presentation mode, I'll turn it over to you, and you can start your presentation whenever you're ready.
Okay, hi, thank you everyone. Yeah, today I'll be talking about my Green Corps service term so far. So first things first, I just want to start with an outline of what the presentation is going to look like. So first, I'm going to give a quick introduction to myself, what Green Corps is, and what the Chloride Reduction Program does. Then I'm going to talk about some of the projects I've been working on at my host site, which is the Chloride Reduction Program here at the MPCA. So I'll talk about the smart salting tool and also some training material um, improvements that I've been making, like adding success stories, sort of overhauling some presentations and integrating new research. I'll also talk about some of the other work that I do as a Green Corps member, including civic engagement and professional development. And then I'll wrap up by just talking about sort of what lies ahead. Yeah, so first for introductions. So uh, yeah, I'm Coral Outwater. All throughout high school and college, I never was 100% sure what I wanted to do for my career. So I knew that I really liked science and I cared a lot about helping people and making a positive impact on the world um, for people and also the environment and animals. So I explored a lot of different things, biology, physics, chemistry. I was interested in veterinary sciences and physics and environmental science, of course. Um, and then as I sort of entered my undergraduate studies, I went to Carleton College, which is in Northfield, Minnesota, which is what brought me to Minnesota because I'm originally from Arizona. Um, but as I entered my undergraduate studies at Carleton, uh, I figured I might go into medicine. So I was sort of preparing for that just because I thought it'd be a good way to combine science with helping people. But as I was applying to medical school, like I took the MCAT and everything, I realized that I do really want to work with the environment and that as much as medicine is kind of interesting to me, I felt like there was like a part of me that I was really neglecting by not at least trying to go into environmental work. So I decided instead of applying to medical school, I would take some gap years to try new things out, sort of dip my toes in. And yeah, so I spent several months after graduation looking for jobs, doing environmental sustainability work. And then I found out about GreenCorps. So GreenCorps is an 11-month program and it places members who are usually like early career environmental professionals with host organizations in Minnesota with the goal of helping them meet their environmental goals. It's part of AmeriCorps, and so it's funded partially federally and partially through the state. As a program, the majority of the time of the members is spent at the host site doing those projects, those environmental projects. But at the same time, there's about 20% of time that can be spent on training, which would be both Green Corps required trainings and also different professional development, sort of whatever the member wants to do. And then beyond that, there's also 100 hours that can be spent on civic engagement, which would be volunteering completely like outside of the host site. And if you're wondering why we call it like a service term, it's because we don't really get like a salary or a wage. So it's not a job. Instead, we get a living stipend. And so it's sort of somewhere in between work and volunteer because the goal is more professional development and getting experience rather than making money. um, Yeah, and the reason that I really wanted to do this program, there's lots of reasons, but the first one is that I like that you're sort of matched with a host site because I wanted something that would align with my interests and my skills, but also bring me into contact with new experiences and sort of push me to explore things that I hadn't considered before. And so by having this match-based system, I thought it would do both of those things. I also really wanted to try doing something in policy and education because I really wanted to do something that had clear impact and was sort of about like the implementation and really going out there and making a difference. And I thought that that would be a great way to do that. I also that was one of the reasons why I specifically wanted to do something at the MPCA because I was really excited by sort of the like statewide reach that that could have in terms of making a positive impact on the environment. And then lastly, I think it's really important that this program sets aside time that you can use for professional development because I knew that was something I would need to spend a lot of time on. Um, and it's something that I often procrastinate or neglect doing. So I like that it was sort of built into the program and that we have like a cohort of people all working on the same thing. So I did get into the GreenCorps program and I matched with the Chloride Reduction Program at the MPCA. I think part of the reason I matched with this program is because as an undergraduate, I did my capstone project on PFAS. So that was sort of brought me into water resources and water quality. So the Chloride Reduction Program is run by Brooke Asmussen and Shani McCracken-Holm, and it's part of the Education and Outreach Unit of RMAD in the MPCA. The program specifically focuses on supporting communities and organizations across Minnesota to identify and reduce chloride at the source and to protect water quality. To do that, there's lots of different things we do. We hold trainings and educational events. We collaborate and partner with organizations across Minnesota. We distribute resources, and we also directly assist communities with grants. So that's what the program does. And as a member of this program, I would regret not telling you guys a bit about chloride pollution in Minnesota. So I'm going to talk about that for just a couple of slides here. So in Minnesota, the most common source of chloride pollution is de-icing salt. So that would be applied to the roads, usually in the form of sodium chloride or rock salt, but also in the form of magnesium, calcium, or potassium chloride. After that salt is applied to roads, the chloride washes into stormwater conveyance systems and surface waters. Other major sources of chloride include water softening salts and fertilizer, but there are a lot more sources of chloride that are more minor in the state. Once chloride enters water, it really does not come out of it. So even for salt that ends up entering wastewater systems, where it would go to a wastewater treatment plant, those plants still aren't equipped to remove chloride from the water. So it still just flushes right through and goes into our surface waters. And then once it's in the surface water, it is not removed by any chemical or biological degradation. So that's why we call chloride a permanent pollutant. So chloride is definitely a problem in the state of Minnesota. We have 68 water bodies, which, as you can see on this map here, are mostly in the Twin Cities metro area that are impaired for chloride, meaning that they exceed the chronic limit of 230 milligrams per liter of chloride. In addition to surface waters, chloride can also enter groundwater through infiltration through the soil, and that impacts mostly shallow groundwater wells, but it can also reach into deeper wells. The impacts of chloride pollution are widespread and varied. So in aquatic ecosystems, chlorides can impair the development of fish, amphibians, and invertebrates, harm population dynamics and biodiversity, and also impact plant growth. And then de-icing salt, when it's applied to roads, parking lots, and sidewalks, damages vegetation nearby and also corrodes infrastructure, which ends up costing a lot of money in the spring for repairs. And while there are some alternatives to chloride-containing products, they all have some sort of environmental impact. So instead of telling people not to use any chloride and just to try to find something else instead, in our program, we really focus on reducing the amount of salt you use by using it more efficiently. So to try to get that message across, we have a training and certification program called the Smart Salting Training, where we inform winter maintenance staff on ways to reduce their salt use according to the 4 R's of winter maintenance. The first one is the right goals. That's really important for making sure that priority is given to the right area and that maintenance in other areas does not exceed what is needed for safety. As part of this, we also emphasize the importance of writing that stuff down clearly in policy and documenting it. The next R is physical removal, because the more that you're able to plow or shovel off snow, then the less salt or other materials is required afterwards. If physical removal alone is not enough, some product would be used. And in that case, we want to make sure that we're using the right product for the given conditions. There's a bunch of different products from brine to pre-wet salt, rock salt, magnesium chloride, organic additives, and all of them could be the right choice depending on the conditions, although we do emphasize using liquids rather than granular because they work faster. And again, more efficiency means less overall salt being used. And then lastly, we make sure in the right amount to give advice on the amount of product to use for the temperature and conditions using application rate charts and support systems. In addition to these materials for winter maintenance organizations, we do have stuff for property managers, community leaders, and also people who work on water softening, all to reduce that chloride loading. So that's the introduction so far. I'm just gonna take a sip of water. Opening up the chat just to see if I'm not doing anything wrong. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so now I'm going to talk about my host site projects. I've been working on quite a few different projects, but I'll share what I think are like the most impactful ones. So first is the work that I did to update the Smart Salting tool. So the Smart Salting tool is a website, and on that website, there's sort of two parts. One is the chloride source assessment. So through that, cities, counties, watershed organizations, and MS4 permittees can evaluate sources of chloride in their communities and make action plans. And then also we have road maintenance assessments for winter maintenance organizations. Those evaluate current practices, develop and track changes, and estimate the salt and monetary savings from those changes. This, the last assessment that I just said, which is the monetary savings one, is called the salt savings calculator, and that's where I really dug in and spent most of my time on. So for the salt savings calculator, how it works is the user inputs information about their current and future winter maintenance practices. So that would either be numerical, for example, how many lane miles of road they treat or how many gallons of brine they apply per season, or it could be selecting from a drop down. So that would be, for example, to let us know what kind of buckets they use or how they store their salt over the summer, something that can't really be quantified with a number, but is still really important. The tool then uses that to estimate how much salt, salt sand mix, and liquids they would need in the future, how much money that would save, and what percentage of a reduction in salt use that would cause. So this tool was made over 10 years ago, and since then it has been updated with lots of new features and has also moved through the hands of several contracted companies. This year, what we wanted to do is prepare the tool to be moved to Minute, and doing that meant tying up any loose ends and correcting any issues that might be present in the tool before the transfer. So for the most part, we anticipated just a few small issues with like language clarity or typos, and that was true for most of the tool, but a previous team member who was contracted to help with it did find some discrepancies specifically with the salt savings calculator. Here's one example here that he found. In this report, the inputs that he put in were supposed to be the exact same for the current and the future. So that means that there should not be any reduction in salt because you're not changing anything about your practices. However, as you can see here, they got a negative reduction potential, which means that something was amiss with the calculations. However, even though these issues were noted, they weren't really able to be fixed right away. And part of the reason is that since this calculator was built over a decade ago, and there's also very little documentation about its inner workings, we didn't really know how to go about fixing it. The previous team member did work with the software engineer at the company that's sort of updating the tool right now that we're going to move it from to take it to minute. The previous team member did work with that engineer to export some of the equations in the tool into a spreadsheet, which part of it is shown here. But that spreadsheet was incomplete, like it didn't have all of the equations. It was kind of hard to see how the variable names were tied to the user inputs, and it also didn't have any explanations on how they worked. In addition, when I talked with the software engineer who was in charge of the code, I learned that it wasn't just the documentation of the tool and the equations that might have issues, but the code itself. I think partially just because of how old it was. To a modern coding eye, it was sort of inefficient and confusing, and so it would be hard to update properly. So after we sort of discovered all that, we decided that we really wanted to tackle this so that the outputs of the tool were accurate and so that future changes to the tool could be made more easily. So we sort of revised the project to include rewriting the code for the salt savings calculator, which the software engineer would do. And then I would validate all of the equations and produce good detailed documentation of it. Over time, I did come up with some like a workflow for finding and fixing issues with the tool. So basically how I did it is I started with making some example scenarios that were calculated to have reasonable relationships between each of the inputs. Then I would run that example scenario through the tool and compare the output to what you would expect for the scenario. From there, I would zoom in a bit and try to trace the issue to a specific equation. Originally, the way I had to do this is I had to have the software developer send a list of the outputs to each individual equation, which is not ideal because I needed to like contact him every time. But later, on the advice of some amazing modeling experts here at the MPCA, I ended up building a parallel Excel sheet, which basically just replicates all of the calculations step by step of the tool. And so that way, I could check any scenario I wanted and see each intermediate value of the equations in order to catch errors. So once I found which equations seemed to be wrong, I would look closely at that equation and identify the root cause, either a coding error, like maybe the equation theoretically is right, but there was an issue putting it into the code, or maybe a coefficient is off, or if there's something flawed with the logic of the equation. Then I would rebuild the equation sort of just based on what it's designed to do in the tool, starting from the base assumptions of the tool. Then I would test that specific equation through multiple scenarios to see if its individual output makes sense. And then lastly, I would put that equation back in the whole tool and then run the scenarios again and compare them to the original answers that we got that we thought were wrong, as well as what we would expect from that situation. So that's a little vague because it's all very general. So I'm going to explain again with an example scenario. Of this is something that I like, one of the fixes I really made. So in this example scenario, you can see here are the inputs. So what I wanted is to get a very extreme reduction in salt use. So I set all of the drop downs for best management practices to be in the worst possible practice in the present and the best possible practice in the future. So with that, we would expect a small value for the tons of salt needed in the future because we should be saving so much salt that we won't need that much in the future. However, when I ran this example through the tool, as you can see here, it actually gave a negative value for the tons of salt needed in the future, which you can't have like negative tons of salt. So clearly it's overestimating the reduction in salt and something was wrong. So the next thing I did is I traced that discrepancy down to a specific equation by looking at the values for every single equation involved in that calculation. And eventually I found that they all seem to make sense except for one at the very end, which is the equation shown here. So what this equation does is it adds up all of the salt savings from winter maintenance, improved storage methods, and improved delivery methods. And it's supposed to produce a total amount of salt saved by all of those improved practices. It might seem right at first because it's like, well, if you want a total reduction, you would just add up all of the smaller reductions. But there actually is a logic problem in this equation, which can be illustrated by testing it out. So let's say that we're improving our winter maintenance practices, and so we reduce our salt use in the winter by 75%. Separately, we improve how we store salt, and so we reduce the amount of salt that will be in storage by 50%. This equation would just add those two numbers together. 75 plus 50 would be 125% reduction. So that's not possible because any reduction over 100% would mean that we're saving more salt that we had in the first place, and that would give us a negative number, as we saw with the report. So the issue with this is that the way that the equation is constructed is that it implies that the amount of salt stored and delivered is completely independent of the amount of salt that's used during the winter. However, that is not true in real life. In the same example as before, if you're reducing your winter salt use by 75%, then you're only going to be using 25% of the salt that you currently use. In that case, since you're only using 25%, you would also only store 25% of what you originally stored, as opposed to the original amount that you stored. So therefore, storage savings need to be calculated on top of that reduced number, not on the original number. If you account for that in our explanation, you get a more reasonable 87% total reduction. And if you were to run this new equation through a bunch of different examples, even the most extreme, you would find that it never gives a value over 100%. So we figured out the issue. We sort of figured out how to fix it with a very simple example. And then from there, I need to scale back up and get more complicated again. So I changed all of the equations that were relevant to that to reflect this new method of calculating it. And I tested those equations with intermediate values. So you can see on the left column here of this Excel sheet, those are all the intermediate values that I would check. And then I tested the scenario again with the tool. And this time I got a positive value of 95 tons, which is still a really small number because it's a very extreme example, but at least now this value is positive. So that's sort of how I went about tackling finding issues with the tool. And I did that over the course of several months, again and again, for a bunch of different equations. And to wrap up, I ended up making a document grouping equations with the same function so that they can be looked at together. And this document ended up having a total of 61 unique equations with the tool. I will shout out that I met with another modeling expert outside of the MPCA who gave me a lot of great advice on how to make this document, because I'd never done anything like this before. But how it is organized is for each equation, I said the purpose of the equation, the sort of generic form of the equation, the units of all the variables involved, which equations it's used in the actual tool, and then the logic behind the equation so that people who look at it in the future will be able to understand why it's constructed that way. And this documentation is sort of a companion to the Excel sheet that has all of the equations. And that Excel sheet, again, can calculate the same information as the online tool. So it's a great way to check and make sure that the online tool is working as intended if it matches with the Excel sheet. So that's sort of the conclusion of that project. And the reason that I wanted to share this one with you guys is because, in my opinion, it was the biggest accomplishment of my service term, at least so far. I still have a couple months left. But I think it was a good accomplishment because we didn't just fix the tool so now that the outputs are accurate, but we also, I also provided good documentation so that future changes and updates can be made more smoothly. And so hopefully they don't take quite as much time as this one took. I also think that because of the amount of time investment that it took, the program, our little program, just 2 people, really wouldn't have had the capacity to do it if I weren't here as a GreenCorps member. So that made me feel very valuable and good for the program. The last thing that I really liked about this project is I really liked using my skills for it, and it made me realize that modeling work is something that I might want to do in the future, which I really wouldn't have considered before. So it was sort of a perfect way to use my GreenCorps service term, which is to sort of reflect and see what I want to do with my career. And so that was really valuable for that. to take another sip of water. Okay, so that's my discussion of the smelt salting tool, and now I'll move on to talk a bit about the training materials that we have. So the Chloride Reduction Program has smart salting certification trainings. We have a bunch of different ones. We mostly have ones for hands-on professionals, so that would be like winter maintenance professionals or plumbers doing water softening. For that, we have ones for parking lots and sidewalks, for roads and rural roads, and for water softening. We also have trainings for people more on the higher level of like management. And for that, we have property management training, as well as level 2 organization certification training, which involves going through the smart salting tool and making like a best management plan to show that the organization is caring about chloride reduction and keeping track of what they're doing to help reduce chloride. Another one of the programs we have for smart salting is the Community Leaders Workshop. This one's special because it was started by a GreenCorps member a couple of years ago. And because of that, each year the GreenCorps member in our program is the main facilitator of that workshop. And then Brooke and Shandy also have a few sections in which they talk. For the Community Leaders Workshop, it's really targeted at decision makers, appointed officials, people on boards of like watershed organizations, community organizations, or environmental bodies. For my service term, I ended up facilitating 3 of those workshops, and we had a total of 60 attendees for them. And these workshops are also done in collaboration with a host site that helps to promote and advertise the workshop. And in my service term, we collaborated with Ramsey County League of Local Governments, Green Step Cities and Tribal Nations, Conservation Minnesota, and Winter Salt Week. We did one for Winter Salt Week as well. So aside from leading those workshops, I also spent a lot of my GreenCorps service term focusing on improving some of the presentations. So that would be mainly the parking lots and sidewalks presentation, the roads presentation, and the rural roads presentation. So the parking lots and sidewalks presentation, which we call the PLS presentation, and the roads presentations were made in 2007 and 2009 respectively. So they're very old, and they have definitely been updated since then, often, but only really on a slide-by-slide basis. So the formatting and organization haven't really had a chance to be completely overhauled since their original creation. So we definitely wanted to work on those. I also worked on the rural roads presentation, which is a new training that we launched this year. And I attended the technical advisory committee and pilot trainings to sort of get good feedback. And we just worked on polishing and editing that up as we launch it as a new training. So as I prepared for the overhauls, mainly to the parking lots and sidewalks and roads presentations, I went to the trainings, took notes, and spoke also with the instructors to see what they want to see different in the new trainings. So the main change that we made was updating the formatting. So I overhauled the design of the presentations to be sleeker and more visually appealing. And mainly, although I can't really demonstrate it here today, is to have consistency between each slide so that the title is always like the same font size and there's a good continuity, which has a bunch of benefits. I mean, one is it makes the presentation seem more professional, but it also helps to decrease distractions if everything's changing on each slide so that the learners can focus more on the content. And we also added some new pictures for that. Some other things that we wanted to consider when doing the presentation design is to have a really thoughtful organization with the hopes that having a more logical organization helps information flow better rather than just like reading from a list where everything is sort of disjointed. And that through line sort of, I think, helps comprehension and memory of the information. And in order to emphasize the organization, we also added, as you can see here, we have subheadings now for the sections so that it can help the attendee really understand where they are in the presentation. And as a part of that, we also wanted to make sure we have clear title slides indicating the point of each slide, again, to sort of have that organization and hopefully help with engagement. In addition to updating the design of the PowerPoints, we also added some new information. So we added plenty of new content that we thought would be really relevant to each group of attendees. So for the parking lots and sidewalks presentation, for example, we added a slide about how salt is harmful to pets, because if you're working on sidewalks, that could be something that would be really big to consider. And we also, for example, added a slide about how fresh water is really important to protect, because with this audience, we don't know how much their base understanding of all that stuff is. So we want to make sure that they understand from that level why it's so important to not pollute our fresh water. And the other thing that we wanted to add was just more interactive elements to help sort of break up the more lecture-y sides of it. So we have like talk with the person next to you, or really targeted questions for that. Another thing we wanted to add were success stories. So success stories are a really crucial part of training and outreach and education in general, because they show real, tangible examples of work that people have done, and that helps the audience see ways that they could implement the suggestions that we have in a real way. They also sort of provide proof to the audience that some of our claims, for example, that salt use reduction can still maintain safety and can cut costs, it can sort of show that those are actually true claims and people have really had success with that. So to that end, we've been trying to implement more success stories. For example, here on the slide, you can see some success stories we added to the rural roads training, which have some rural road relevant stories like new tungsten carbide cutting edges for trade plows, for trail plows, or having better winter weather monitoring systems. And in order to gather more success stories beyond these, we have been reaching out to recipients of the Small Business Environmental Improvement Loans. So those the SBL, or Small Business Environmental Improvement Loan Program, it provides zero interest loans for environmentally friendly equipment purchases. So it covers a lot of things, including those that aren't related to chloride, but about half of all of those loans are specifically for chloride reduction equipment, such as brine makers or brine sprayers. And so we really wanted to reach out to those people who got those loans. And so both the Chloride Reduction Program and the SBL program staff have been working together to try to reach out to those people to get their stories, have a site visit, and a template to fill out. And all of that stuff is still currently ongoing. The last addition to the trainings that I want to talk about is adding some new integration of like modern research and literature. The main reason we wanted to do this, it wasn't even in my original work plan, but I just had a lot of experience reading scientific literature because of my background with my chemistry degree. And so we thought it would be fun if I could just read some ongoing and newly released scientific studies related to salt use, and help to take that sort of dense scientific information and turn it into a legible presentation and script. And so, I did that for quite a few different things. As you can see on the screen here, this is with a study on chloride's effects on trout. I also looked into wild rice, some reports on the use of brine versus rock salt, alternative de-icers, low salt design strategies, and more. And so we have those slides to sort of slot into presentations when necessary, and we've already put some of that information into the new parking lots and sidewalks and rural roads presentation. So that's all I'll be sharing today about my host site work. And now I'm just going to talk a bit about the other kind of things that I can do as a GreenCorps member. So as I said at the beginning of the presentation, GreenCorps members can spend approximately 100 hours doing civic engagement activities. So for me, what I decided to do is I decided to volunteer at a nearby women's domestic violence shelter that's really close to my apartment. It's called Women's Advocates. It's a really great place. And there I help a small maintenance team, very small, it's 2 people pictured here. And I just help keep the facilities clean for the women and children who are staying there. I think it's a really nice opportunity to kind of build community, because I just recently moved to St. Paul, so I don't really know that many people here. It's nice to I get to do it during the day, during the week, because GreenCorps is really flexible and my host site's really flexible. So the timing really worked out for that. And it's nice to do something good and sort of get my body moving, doing cleaning and stuff. So it's really nice that I can count this towards my service hours. Some other volunteer events that I've done. This picture here is from a event that was organized by a fellow GreenCorps member who works at the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. So there we pulled out invasive garlic mustard. And that was really fun just to get outside and do some good volunteer work. Aside from volunteering, GreenCorps does allow up to 20% of service time to be spent on trainings. And one of the things I did for that was I had the opportunity to attend the Tribal State Relations training, which was really awesome and really unique thing that I got to do working at the MPCA. So I went with another MPCA GreenCorps member, Stephanie, who works with Green Step Cities and Tribal Nations. And the host of the Tribal State Relations training at that time was the Prairie Island Indian community. It was a great opportunity. We got to tour sites of community culture and business, which included their buffalo herd pictured here, cannabis cultivation and processing site, and their bark lodge, which Stephanie and I are pictured in front of here on the screen. And at the actual training portion, I learned a lot about the history of treaties, displacement, and laws relating to tribal nations, which I really hadn't learned about that much before. So it was really awesome to learn about all that stuff. In addition to that training, GreenCorps members do all sorts of stuff from like Master Naturalist courses to in-person things, conferences. But what I ended up doing is I did a lot of online trainings. One that I'll just point out is that I've been learning to use the coding language Python for data analysis. I'm pointing that out because it's something I wouldn't really have even thought to do. But after working with that salt savings calculator, I realized that I am kind of interested in that. So I ended up pursuing that for my online training. So there would be a lot more that I could talk about if I had a ton of time. But that's all I'll talk about today in terms of what I've been doing so far as a GreenCorps member. So I'm just going to wrap up by talking a bit about what the future holds. So first off, we have great news that the Chloride Reduction Program is going to have another GreenCorps member next year. For that GreenCorps member, we have lots of great stuff planned, including gathering even more success stories and making an online repository of those, which will likely be in the form of a story map so that people can look and see all of the great work that businesses and like governments and stuff have been doing to reduce chloride. They'll also be making an online training using Articulate to help people navigate the smart salting tool. This will act as a replacement for the level 2 certification trainings, which used to be online and sort of walk users through the tool, but having the Articulate will be nice because they can sort of do it at their own pace whenever they want, and it won't require any additional instructors. As far as myself, just reflecting on the GreenCorps term, I think just as I hoped, this position gave me time and space away from the fast pace of college to really sit with myself and my interests and reflect, and also to do more extended research into career paths. Also, I definitely learned that after spending time with my GreenCorps cohort and with my team at the MPCA, it helped me realize that I really do like working in the environmental field. It's nice to be surrounded by people who care as much about the environment as I do, and everyone is really so welcoming and caring. At the same time, I also realized that as much as I'm convinced by the importance of education, outreach, and policy, I think my specific skills likely point to a different sort of field. And I also definitely realized that I was missing the kind of science that I did in college, which is more like hands-on lab work and hard science. So even things that like pulled me toward the field and pushed me toward the field, it's all great information to know, and I really learned more about myself. And with that, I decided that I'm going to try moving into bioengineering for sustainability. So after my service term is done at the end of August, I'll be hopefully getting a research assistant position, and then I'll be applying for a PhD for the next cycle in bioengineering. So I get to stay with the environmental field, but I also get to maybe do more things that are more suited to my specific interests and my skill sets. And with that, I would like to thank everyone at the Chloride Reduction team with Brooke and Shandy, and our unit supervisor, Britt, everyone in GreenCorps, Ashley, Caleb, and Andrew, and everyone at the MPCA, all the funding sources that we have. And lastly, I definitely have to say that if you know someone who's interested in being a GreenCorps member, please let them know as soon as possible, because the GreenCorps member applications close June 16th. If you're interested in having a GreenCorps member, those host site applications are usually in the spring, so you'd have to wait until next year. That is the end of my presentation, but if anyone has questions, I would happily take them.
Thank you so much, Coral. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm not currently seeing any questions in the chat, but I'm sure plenty of folks out there have great questions for you. So yeah, feel free to drop those in there or unmute and ask. We have a lot of great jobs though.
Thank you. I don't think I ever talked for that long all at once. Like the community leaders presentation, it's broken up a little bit with Brooke and Shandy popping in, so my throat hurts.
You did great. I loved how you took water breaks. Give people a minute to.
Well, I have one to get us going.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Mark.
If possible. Coral, that was really a great presentation. I really enjoyed that. And it really reminds me of what I would consider broadly to be this kind of One Health approach to the issues that we face. I mean, you are coming at it from kind of a different perspective, I think, than a lot of us have, having been immersed in the environmental area for quite a while. You were able to bring a different skill set, I think, in to look at these problems that you were looking at. And to me, that's just a great cross-pollination of skills that you bring. And looking at the calculator with fresh eyes and being able to identify and improve the calculator, make it more accurate, I think is just hugely effective work in a really important area. So I thought that was great. I guess one of the questions I have is if you were to keep working in this area, where would you take the calculator and maybe the salt, the salt issue in the future? I mean, where would you like to see it improved, or what other issues would you focus on, do you think, if you were to continue on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that would be really nice with the calculator is to have more options for using things that aren't just NaCl, sodium chloride, because right now the tool is based off, like, you can have salt sand mixes, you can have rock salt, you can have pre-wet salt and brine, but it's all still based on sodium chloride. But and that's sort of a pretty good approximation in terms of like the calculations that have to be done, the amount of chloride per, ton of salt, or per compared to other things like magnesium chloride or calcium chloride. But people are using a lot of stuff other than just rock salt and NaCl. And so I think incorporating that into the tool would be great. Although it definitely would make the calculations a bit more complicated. But I think that would be a great goal to have if I could have kept working on it. Yeah. Was there anything else for that question? I just saw one in the chat, so.
No, that's great.
Okay,
Interesting,
great.
interesting perspective. I like that. Looking at different areas of salt rather than just sodium chloride. I think that's a great idea.
So to answer Michael's question in the chat, I was just okay, the smart salting tool is online. So it's like a web application where the inputs and outputs are all online for the user at smartsaltingtool.com. Um, in the process of editing the calculator, I did end up making the Excel spreadsheet that basically replicates all of the calculations, but that is not something that's publicly available. That's just the spreadsheet for internal use. The actual tool is online. I think it's built in C something, C plus, C sharp. I can't do that kind of coding. So we had the software engineer that we were working with was taking the calculation changes that I made and implementing them to the online version. Thanks, Brooke, with the URL in the chat.
All right. Any other questions for Coral this morning? Usually when I try to wrap things up, we get another one. So let me just draw this out for a couple more seconds. Otherwise, we can wrap it up a couple minutes early on this gloomy Thursday morning. Okay. All right. Oh, see, there it is. How did you get matched with the Smart Salting program?
Yeah, so during my application, well, once I was, I think, accepted, I don't remember what portion of it, but I sent a list of like my top 3 host sites. So they give the Green Corps members like a big list of all the host sites and the kind of work you'd be doing. So I made a list of the top 3 and I put the MPCA chloride reduction in my top 3. And from there, I think they probably, I don't really know how they end up matching. I'm assuming that they just they read your resume, think of like the skills that you have and interests and which of those top ones they would align the best with. Um, so yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we get to choose kind of as the member. We get to state our preferences.
That's awesome. In what ways are you learning Python? I'm thinking of delving into it as well because data analysis is of interest to me, says Ethan.
Yeah. So I took 2 courses on LinkedIn, LinkedIn Learning. So the first one was, I think, like the basics of Python data analysis, something like that. Or sorry, the basics of Python. So it was just like basically learning the language. And then there was a specific one, Python for data analysis. So those were the 2 courses. And then I'm also I got a Coursera description because we get $600 of training funds as Green Corps members. And so through Coursera, I've been doing specifically Python for genomic data analysis. So yeah, I just selected courses that sort of like built on top of each other in terms of difficulty, getting like more and more specific to the kind of data analysis that I'm interested in. But yeah, LinkedIn Learning was pretty good. You know, the courses that I had, they like you have to do your own projects where they like tell you what your code has to output and you have to write the code for it. And so it definitely made me actually learn how to do it, as opposed to sometimes just lectures sort of go in one ear and out the other. So yeah, I recommend them.
Awesome. Thank you. Ooh, good question. How much did you use AI in your work?
Yeah, so I used it to bounce ideas off of a lot, especially because there wasn't anyone anyone that I knew that could uh, had like modeling experience and also had the time to take out of their day to like get familiar with all the parts of the tool. So often I would like explain to it, the like AI, what all is going on, um, and sort of, yeah, bounce ideas off of it and brainstorm. But yeah, I made any changes like myself. Like I didn't have it make any equations for me, and I just used them, and I didn't. But yeah, it was great for brainstorming and bouncing ideas off of.
Okay, not seeing anything else in the chat. One last call for questions. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing anything rolling in, so I think we can probably adjourn a couple minutes early this morning. Coral, thank you so much for joining us and enduring your audio issues and giving us a really great presentation about your service term with GreenCorps. We so appreciate having you this morning. And you did great work and obviously have a very bright future ahead of you. So yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for your engagement and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a good day.